Thank you, Julie. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to talk to the people today online.
Yeah.
I'm the director of the Office of Food Additive Safety. This office is responsible for the pre-market review of ingredients that are intentionally added to food. And how we approach this responsibility in terms of safety is driven not only by the science, but by our legal authorities, and that is what's in the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And I hope to be able to, during this session today, talk a bit about how we do that and answer questions about how we approach the safety assessments prior to market entry of new food ingredients. And by that, I mean things like food additives, color additives, substances that are generally recognized as safe, substances used in packaging and food contact materials, foods derived from new varieties of plants, and also more recently, the development of the expectation, the attempt, the innovation of using cell culture of animal cells to produce meat as a food source. So our office is involved with developing those policies as well. So I'm looking forward to a vivid discussion today.
Yeah, that's great. Happy to have you. So I'll just kind of like piggyback on the conversation we just finished, where Victor led the panel on talking about personalized nutrition. So one thing that people are eager to know today, after dealing with COVID for the past 3 months, is how can I boost my health, through my immunity through nutrition? And of course, there are many organizations and there are many institutions working more in that regard to say, okay, there are different ways where people can nourish themselves and boost their health, boost their immunity. Now, it's not just that. We now have products on the market that are coming out and saying, oh yeah, we boost immunity. This food boosts immunity. Now, my question is, when it comes to the FDA approving this type of products, okay, let me break the question into two. Number one is, have you seen a surge in applications or surge in requests for products that have this kind of claim, that make this kind of claims in terms of what they do to the immune system, or a specific pattern of products coming into the marketplace trying to target consumers' demand? Because when there's an increase in demand for something, when people are interested in something, entrepreneurs want to come into that space to provide the resource. So have you seen a surge in your office for this, or things have just been the same?
Right. So it's important when you think about how an FDA's oversight of food ingredients, it's not just the chemical or the microbe, it's the chemical and the microbe in its intended use and how it's presented, and claims on the effectiveness of the ingredient or the microbe or whatever determines how it's regulated. So in terms of my program, we do a purely safety determination in terms of the use of the chemical. Is it safe, and is it safe for the general population and over a lifetime? So this is not under a prescription. This is not under a temporary use. It is for the entire food supply and the entire population in terms of exposure. We do a safety assessment. We don't do a risk-benefit analysis or a safety-benefit analysis, which is what is done on the drug side. Okay. So with drugs are inherently biologically active and therefore more likely to be toxic, and therefore need to be administered, and their exposure, their use needs to be monitored under medical supervision. In the food side, it's a different, whole different ballgame, because we're looking at it in terms of new ingredients, new foods. Is it safe for the population as a whole? If you begin to make claims about the benefits of the presence of an ingredient, then you start, depending on the category of claim, whether it's a health claim or a drug claim, you get into different regulatory authorities in the agency. If you start making drug claims, you are a drug, and
Mm-hmm.
it is illegal to add drugs to food.
Mm-hmm.
Health claims are available. I'm not an expert on labeling and claims, but it's very important as you going to market to consult FDA and at least look at our webpage to understand what is the difference between a health claim and a drug claim.
Okay.
In addition to making sure that the addition of the ingredient to the food supply is safe. And in the US, the law, the safety standard for substances intentionally added to food is a reasonable certainty of no harm under the intended conditions of use.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we look at in terms of making a decision on whether to approve or sanction the use of a new ingredient.
Okay, so I think I want to ask you a bit, I want us to dive a bit deeper into food and drug, like separating the two. So for instance, you might have a company that produces food. It just so happens that this food, it doesn't matter if you are the one producing it or someone cooks the food, gets the material from the wild and cooks at home. This food is known to have health benefits. So it has health benefits. Let's hypothetically use diabetes, for instance. You consume this food and it relieves you of your symptoms. Now, that health benefits, does it change it from food to drug in your office? By that I mean, so let's look back at what Victor's panel just discussed and talking about personalized nutrition and some of the things they're working on. And so if you're talking about nutrition, you have a dietitian that recommends a particular food type for your health condition. Now that is food. They've not added any drug to it. It's just purely food. So making that recommendation and saying, now I know this works, I'm going to package this and sell to other people. I mean, I've used it for 6, 7, 8 years and it's working for me. It's working for my family. Why not sell it? So it becomes a business. Now it becomes FDA's responsibility to provide oversight to this food.
Right.
So do you now change the classification of this food based on the health benefits it provides, which must be disclosed on the label if you're going to sell it anyway? So does that change anything, or if it does, how does it change it?
It doesn't really change anything. I mean, nutrition and dietary composition and the nutritional composition of food is clearly very important. And clearly, I think from your previous panelists, you know, we're getting more granular in terms of our understanding of individuals' benefits from different nutritional properties and qualities of nutrition and of our diet. And that changes over time, over our lifetime. What is, and in fact, dietary patterns change over a lifetime. What is consumed as a, you know, how much I ate when I was a teenage boy is nowhere close to what I can consume today. I mean, my dietary exposure to sugars is much lower than it was when I was a teenager. That's a typical sort of thing in terms of changes over time. So the fact that, you know, people are looking at the nutritional quality or the nutritional composition of food and trying to tailor it to particular types of individuals doesn't necessarily make it a drug. If it was making drug claims, then it becomes a drug.
Okay, all right.
And is regulated as such.
Okay, all right. That helps. Thank you. So there was a time I had a conversation with some investigators, and we're talking about making specific recommendations. Now, this moves away from food a little bit. This is you have a type of vegetable that you feel like it has health benefits to people. Now, you want to extract some things from that vegetable and make recommendations based on what you found on the lab. So one thing the person, the investigator mentioned is that the FDA would not permit anyone to make dietary recommendation that's medicinal in nature because any food that treats people, make them feel better, is considered a drug, according to your office. And there was a bit of ambiguity when it comes to that. Now, does that change how we classify this? Is it going to be classified as food or no? Is that where it draw? Is there a place where you draw the line in terms of this two? Because I know you have different offices that addresses different things. So where do you draw the line when it comes to recommendations to people, and when it comes to recommendation of food or drug?
So again, the whether something is a drug or a food ingredient, is determined by the law, not by the statute.
Mm.
FDA administers that. So if the statutory definition, if that particular use of that substance falls under the statutory definition of a drug, and that includes not only the intended use, but the claims that are made with it, the law mandates that be regulated as a drug. It's not up to FDA to make that determination.
Okay.
FDA looks at the available information and the way the ingredient or the product is marketed and any claims made on it.
Okay.
So, right. So in the food space, it's very interesting right now because there's a lot of innovation going on. There's a lot of, as I think as one of your previous speakers was talking about, using plant-based foods and exploiting plants as a source of proteins, as a source of other ingredients, perhaps using transgenesis or introducing genes. We're also seeing the use of microbes to produce macro and micro ingredients that have never been in the food supply before. So they're mining the sequence databases to identify proteins that have the particular technological effect they're looking for in terms of the foods they're making. So we're seeing also an explosion in innovative foods where people are trying to, or they're not just trying, they are developing foods without animals, for example. There are examples of companies that are making coffee without coffee plants. And they're quite popular. One of them is out in Seattle. There are people who are developing a way to produce human milk in culture with human cells, or they also tried with bovine cells to produce milk. So there's an incredible amount of innovation going on in not only in the ingredient space but in the food space.
Yeah. So yeah, interesting. There's like you said, there's a lot going on, a lot of innovation going on. So I'll move on to talking about cultured meat and cultured seafood, which is one of the newest innovations that we're seeing on the market. It's exciting. However, people have questions. So we had a panel yesterday. We talked about plant-based innovation. We talked about alternative sources of protein as well. And we also talked about the need to innovate more in this space. Why? Because one thing we've learned from this last pandemic that we had is that we saw how fragile our food system is. For the first time, a lot of us saw food scarcity, going into the stores, seeing empty shelves, seeing absence of meat on the shelves and things like that. So different questions on how we can innovate so that if disaster strikes some other time, we're ready. And of course, people are looking to these different types of innovation, whether it's cultured meat or plant-based protein as alternative to what we currently to livestock. But my question is, how do you regulate this industry? It's new, it's exciting, but we have questions. For me, for instance, as a scientist, one thing I've known for so long is how cell culture could be very tricky. Sometimes it works, especially when you want to do it at scale. Of course, when you're just starting and it's just a few samples here and there, but when you're doing at scale to fill the masses, how do you regulate something like that to ensure that you keep contamination down, you do not expose people to specific compounds that could be harmful to them, not just on the short term, right? Thinking if we continue consuming these products for over a prolonged period of time, what will be the impact on people's health? So, and these are some of the things that you might not know until you see a large population size showing particular symptoms, and then you trace it back to, oh, they all had this meal for this period of time. So I was just thinking if there's something in place to regulate this industry as they take off, because they are taking off.
So all of Julie, all of the things you've mentioned are things we are aware of and are looking at.
Right.
In terms of the cell cultured meats, we are working closely with the developers. We don't have a specific policy in place. And what we're learning from the developers is that they are taking different approaches. And we are evaluating what they're doing and providing them guidance as they're developing the technology. And, you know, we're in the foods program. Part of FDA, the Center for Biological Research and Evaluation, CBER, is very much familiar with cell cultures and the use of cell cultures to produce biologics. So we do have knowledge within FDA to help us in terms of developing policies around it. We're not there yet. I'll be honest with you, but we are actively working on this and identifying where we think there might be safety concerns, and our approach, it just is, there's a parallel to this. I mentioned that we also have a program for foods derived from new varieties of plants. You know, back in the late 80s, early 90s, transgenesis, the introduction of DNA to plants to create transgenic plants, was really starting to develop, with the first one being Calgene tomatoes. And in 1992, we published a policy framework on what we thought were the types of questions from a scientific perspective and also from a legal perspective that developers needed to address. And this sort of it really illustrates sort of the challenges that we have as regulators. We have a law, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. The only authorities that are expressly pre-market authorities in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is the food additive and color additive petition processes. Everything else is post-market. So, you know, it's not, you know, we don't have the authority to require new plant varieties to undergo pre-market review. We don't have authority to have, you know, foods derived from cell cultured meat to go under pre-market review. But we do have authorities under the Act to ensure that food is safe. And so we can work with industry to develop guidance, to develop policies to ensure that these technologies are lawful, but also safe. But it's a process where it allows the agency to use the best available science to drive its decisions, unless the statute is changed.
Okay, so that leads to this interesting question about policies. I know that everything you do is guided by laws and established policies, but I was just wondering how flexible or how quickly can those things change? Because we have a food industry that is so dynamic. We have a food industry that is changing at a very, very, very fast rate. So there may be need to change some of the existing policies regarding regulation for products that just emerging in the market. There may be need for a lot of modification of how things are done. Of course, some of these policies have been 50, 80, 100 years old, and things have changed over time. So I was just wondering if you could enlighten us on the process to change some of the established ways of doing things.
So if you're referring to individual ingredients, I can talk about my office. My office has about 115 people. We have pre-market review programs for food additive petitions and color additive petitions. These are very formal rulemakings and require amendments and publications in the Federal Register. We do about 6 of those per year. Most of those are color additives because I don't know if you want to get into the discussion, but there's no GRAS exclusion or exemption for color additive uses. So if you fall into your use falls under a color additive use, you are required to come in with a color additive petition. Otherwise, the food is adulterated and unlawful. So we do 5 or 6 of those a year. The GRAS notification program does somewhere between 60 or 70 responds to 60 or 70 GRAS notices per year. That's a voluntary program, but that's the way most new ingredients to get a response from FDA. The other program that we have is the Food Contact Notification Program, and we average about 100 responses to food contact notifications per year. All of these numbers I'm giving you is per fiscal year. Okay. So the program in our office is responsive, but we have the resources we have. We're being challenged and asked to develop policies, and not only in terms of the cell cultured meat and looking at the science of that, but we're also looking to adapt our policies around new plant varieties and adapting to the CRISPR technology and the genome editing technology as we go forward. Okay. And using our learnings from what we've learned from the transgenics technology to the genome editing technology and modulating our level of regulatory oversight appropriately within our statutory authorities. So we've been constantly evolving as a program since 1958. And of course, the statute from 1958 for food additives and 1960 for color additives is based on the society's understanding at the time in terms of what needs to be, what's the authority and the approach for substances added to food and what the concerns are and the societal values at that time. It's been 60 years since then? Maybe that changes, but until the statute changes, we can't change. We have to follow the statute. Okay. So, okay. Yep.
So we can change. We have to follow. Yeah, I understand. Okay, I'll just leave that at that. Of course, sometimes you tend to think, what will happen based on what we've seen in the past 5 years. You can only imagine how much will change in the next 5 years. Mm-hmm. And while I know that there's I think politics involved in this as well, in terms of changing the regulations around this. I sometimes wonder if what the structure we have in place might delay innovation, or because if people have exciting innovation they want to bring to the market, especially in the food and health space, but there are regulations that prevent or delay such things from coming to the market. It would be good to know how we can improve the process, or how we can make the process more flexible. When things are flexible enough so that we promote innovation, not delay innovation. Do you see where I'm going with this?
I do see where you are, and I think FDA does have a role there. And when we're asked this question by developers, innovators, we always encourage them to come in and talk to us early in their development phase, in their plans, so that they can understand what the regulatory framework is for this intended use. And so that when they begin to scale up, they don't find out that, I need a color additive regulation. Otherwise my product is illegal. So, this has worked very well with the new plant varieties. And it actually is what we encourage for all of the programs, whether it's the petition process, the GRAS program, or the food contact program. Come in and talk to us before you put your dossier together. And actually, although the GRAS program is voluntary, we believe that has value because it provides the manufacturer with some reassurances that they're meeting their requirements for a safe ingredient. And it is also important not only domestically, but internationally if they try to trade their food overseas, whether it's Europe or Asia or Africa or wherever, South America, anywhere else. They're going to want to know whether it's lawful, especially if it's an innovative ingredient. And in fact, we have worked, our office is also responsible and has been the delegate to the Codex Committee, the US delegate to the Codex Committee on Food Additives. And we've been very instrumental and helpful to our industry, especially the innovative industry, getting their innovative ingredient not only recognized once it's recognized in the US, but recognized under the Codex process. So it's recognized internationally so that it has some status in food traded internationally.
Okay, that's great. And your question, your answer was really on point, especially when you talked about innovators coming to you early, and
Yes.
that's really valuable, so that they know how far, what they need to put in place before they start developing their products. Now, there's a question here. I'll just read it out to you. We have just a few minutes left. I'll read everything. It's a bit long. What if your claim? It's from Dan. It says, what if your claim? What if you claim your product will make people less hungry? Is that a health or medical claim? It's not the ingredients of the product, but how the product is consumed that lessens hunger. This was developed while at an institute base, and says they figured out how the food helps people help people eat less meat, more plant-based products. They discovered if you deliver food to the stomach without smelling or tasting the food in a pill format, you affect the response, and you reduce human cravings. So that's his question. He wants to know if this food, and with the claim that comes with it, will be considered a medical claim, or if you can still go through your office.
Right. So what I would say to that is, I'm not an expert in the labeling claims, I'll be honest.
Okay.
But there is an office within the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition called the Office of Nutrition and Food Labeling. And they are the ones that respond to claims, labeling claims, health claims. So that I don't know who the question is coming from, but I would strongly recommend that he or she reaches out to that office and asks that question to make sure that they're marketing a lawful product.
Okay. Yeah, let me just say that's about that's the only question we have here. Let me see, just one more. Yeah, that's about it. Thank you so much, Dennis, for sharing your insights today. It's been really, really helpful, and I'm sure our audience think the same. Thanks a lot.